Welcome to Modeling and Simulation with Insight Maker. My name is Gene Ballinger, and thank you for being here. For those of you who have not been to one of these sessions before, I host the System Thinking World. I host the System Thinking World discussion group on LinkedIn, and maintain the systemswiki.org website. I do a half a dozen of these sessions a month just because I think it's a meaningful thing to do. I'll put you at ease and let you relax from the beginning in that Insight Maker is free, so I'm not trying to sell Insight Maker, and I don't do consulting. So this is not a sales pitch. What I'd like to talk about today is some thoughts about why it is that we go about creating models, and talk about across a number of different types of models, and then show you specifically how to create a couple of those different types within the context of Insight Maker itself. Today is part one of two parts. Insight Maker was initially developed as a stock and flow simulation environment, though it was readily discovered that if we relaxed a few of the rules in terms of how things were connected, we could create a number of different types of models in the same environment without having to enhance the software to any great extent. I am personally not responsible for the development of Insight Maker. It is the brainchild of Scott Fort Monroe, which is a marvelous piece of work that he has spent the last 2 to 2.5 years developing, and he just simply believed that it was something that needed to exist. It's different than other modeling and simulation environments in that it is in fact web-based and multi-user. So I'm going to go through this sequence today for the next hour. As I mentioned, this is part one of two parts, so if you are not registered for Thursday, I hope today generates enough interest so you're willing to come back on Thursday. The webinars page where you're registered for this session, if you go to that page, which you can find because there is a link for it on every page in the wiki, the discussions tab of that page will provide you with access to the outline for this particular webinar and several of the other ones that I am doing. And this webinar is in fact, the outline is hot in that you can open and navigate through the outline, and if you double click on one of the links, it will open a new page and show you that particular page. Those links, which explicitly have an IM reference in them, are direct links to Insight Maker models. The links that don't have an IM reference are usually to other pages within the wiki, which may have or probably have an embedded video on them that you can watch. So I go through this and offer you this because there are in fact there's a lot more around the specific topics that I'm going to talk about over the next hour. It's a little difficult to compress everything into an hour, so I want to hit the highlights and provide you with explicit links so that you can get back to additional detail. Also, within about an hour after this session, the video for this session will be online, and it will be on the System Thinking World webinars page under the previous webinars section, and I don't know, it'll go right in here where the modeling and simulation with Insight Maker. There'll be another link here for today and one for Thursday when Thursday is done. As I said, the webinars are free, though donations to help cover overhead are greatly appreciated. That's the end of the sales pitch. From a systemic perspective, any time that we end up with a situation that we believe warrants some sort of attention for some reason or another, and with the realization, well, we need to develop an understanding of that situation with the realization that reality is extremely complex and mostly perceived as complicated, and cause and effect are often separated by distance and or time, or both at the same time. We need to develop, hold on. There are times when I just have this problem with my throat and it gets a little raspy. My apologies in advance. We need to develop this understanding so that we can in fact develop a strategy specifically designed to allow us to address this situation that we want to deal with, and at the same time a strategy which endeavors to minimize unintended consequences, because experience has taught us that most of the time unintended consequences generally make the situation worse or create new problems that we or someone else has to deal with in the future. As I said, almost all of the frames that I will use during this session were developed in InsightMaker. So what you are looking at is a model in InsightMaker, which is being unfolded with some JavaScript behind the scenes. And all of these are simply elements of the model that was created. So from a systemic perspective, the idea of a model, I talked about reality being extremely complex and complicated, and we need to develop an understanding. So what we attempt to do is to develop a model that represents that set of interactions that are relevant to the situation, as opposed to a model of all of the things that are related, because then it's just too complicated to understand. And that model, that simplification of reality, with the intent of it promoting our understanding. And there's a quote in the systems community often used that all models are wrong, some models are useful, from George Box. And the intent of this quote was partly to capture one's attention. It's a variation on the map is not the territory, that because the model is in fact a simplification of reality, it isn't reality. Therefore, it's not exactly correct, but it is in fact useful to help us understand. And whether or not a model is a good model or not depends upon whether or not it ends up serving its intended purpose, whatever it is that we are in fact trying to understand. If you have questions along the way, don't hesitate to type them in, and I'll try to respond to them as close to the context that you asked the question is. The thing is, I have a tendency to get wrapped up in what I'm presenting and not notice that the questions are showing up. So, but I will try to get to them. So in InsightMaker, I said it was developed to be a stock and flow simulation environment, though we determined that we could in fact create a number of different types of diagrams with InsightMaker simply by relaxing some of the connection rules. On Thursday, when I talk about stock and flow, Thursday I will go into stock and flow simulation models explicitly, and you will find that there is a very well-defined set of rules in terms of what things you can connect in what manner and why. Other types of models are less explicit in how you connect things. So by relaxing the rules, we figured out that we could create rich pictures, which are simply a pictorial representation of the relationships between things. And the real benefit of rich pictures is that there are essentially no rules associated with how you create them. The bad thing about them is that there are no rules associated with how you create them, which means generally when you provide someone with a rich picture of some set of relationships or interactions, you have to give them a guide as to how to interpret it, unless you have managed to express very explicitly all of the implied relationships in the picture itself. This particular picture is probably not too difficult to understand, where an irate customer, in fact, leads to crisis management within the organization, which tends to lead to employee overload. Been there, done that. Causal loop diagrams are have a more well-defined set of guidelines as to how you put them together, what the connections imply. Though, like rich pictures, they are a qualitative model. They don't have numbers associated with the relations, and it's a static picture, whereas a stock and flow simulation model is in fact a dynamic model, and the simulation causes the relationships to unfold over time and give you a view of it. You're probably familiar with mind maps in that it's simply beginning at a concept or a thought and evolving the relationships outward from that central thought or theme. Dialogue maps are a specific type of map where it's meant to document an exchange between two or more individuals in terms of beginning with a question, the thoughts that arise, the pro and con perspectives on that thought or questions about that thought, and it's a well-defined structure for a conversation to slow a conversation down so that people in fact end up thinking about the conversation and what it is that they're trying to figure out, as opposed to simply arguing with each other. And systemograms, I'm not going to go into it, but there are in fact on the modeling and simulation page within Systems Wiki, which I'll show you in a moment. All right, I'll show it to you in a moment. There's, as I said, these are a few different types of models that we've figured out how to create with Insight Maker. It is expected that there are in fact more. Though there are an extreme array of different kinds of models that people use for to understand different things. This is in fact a model thinking course given by Scott Page, the University of Michigan. This link is in the outline. I've been through most of these videos. It's meant to be a 10-week course with 10 or 12 videos per week. So this is a very long array of very nice videos talking about lots of different kinds of models and what they're used for. So this is a link provided and recommended because it simply expands one's perspective of different types of models and what they might be used for. So let me go ahead and close some of these and get to the next segment of this. I used to open these manually one at a time, and it got to be real old in a hurry. This page, Modeling and Simulation with Insight Maker, this is the one I started to talk to about a moment ago. In this section down here called Systemic Perspective, which you can find on every wiki page, this link, Modeling and Simulation, will take you to this particular page. This is essentially the online user's guide about Insight Maker, and most all of the stuff that I will talk about today is here. The guidelines for creating rich pictures in causal loop diagrams, and here's one on systemograms, dialogue maps. And for each of these links, it takes you to another wiki page that has an embedded video that's 6 to 12 minutes long with a set of notes and a set of links to the particular pieces. In other words, this is the Insight Maker model that's used in that video, and here are a set of related links, and that exists for all of these elements for Insight Maker. So this is the best reference available that we know of for Insight Maker, and it's all online. Now that I've gone round and round in circles, For those of you who have not yet gotten an Insight Maker access, username and password, just go to insightmaker.com, supply a username and password, and, oh wait, no, sorry. Go to the insightmaker.com and then tell it you want to create a new account. It will take you to this page so that you can select a username, provide your email address, and that's not my email address, password, and if the username is not already used, it will set up an account for you and send you a confirmation email. Sometimes the confirmation emails end up in the spam folder, so be sure to check there. If for some reason it doesn't show up, go back and see if you can log on to Insight Maker with your username and password, and sometimes that works. And if not, use this button, which is on the bottom of almost every page in Insight Maker, to go to satisfaction.com and post a message, and Scott or I will get back to you post haste in terms of what the difficulty is. This is the screen where you in fact log in, but when you do, tell it to remember you so that in the future when you go to Insight Maker, it'll log you on automatically. Once you log into the environment, it will tell you if you have unread messages. Insight Maker is more than simply a modeling and simulation environment. It is also an entire, it's wrapped up in a complete social media infrastructure so that people can collaboratively work together to develop models in this environment. So it will tell you if there are any messages. Here's a discussion group about modeling and simulation in Insight Maker. Previous videos, here's the learning environment that I showed you, a couple of basic models that you can look at as a reference. When I started developing models, the worst thing that I ran into was a blank sheet of paper. It used to drive me nuts because I couldn't figure out where I should start. There's also a newsletter that goes out every 2 months, and they're posted here, and if you have an account in Insight Maker, you'll be on the mailing list. And at the bottom there is a reverse chronological running list of all of the models that have been modified in Insight Maker in the last 7 days. So these are in fact the models that I just accessed a few moments ago for those screens that I was showing you, though you can look through these as examples that other people have created if you're looking for other things to get ideas from. Any model that you create in Insight Maker is by default visible to the world. You can in fact make it unpublished so nobody else sees it, though that sort of negates the whole premise behind Insight Maker, in that we wanted an environment that allowed us to readily develop and share models with other people, so that through the interaction with other people we could in fact continually evolve those models so that they get better. And for the models that you create, there'll be a list on the right-hand side of your models, and they'll be in reverse chronological order. So the ones that you modified or created most recently will be at the top of the list. From here, you go to Make an Insight, and this is the screen on which you develop all of your models. There aren't any other screens that you develop models on. This is it, and you're provided with this simplistic rabbit population growth model, simply so it's not a blank screen, and it's a model that does in fact actually run, so that you can simulate this model and it will show you the result of that simulation. And we'll talk, I said we'll talk more about simulations on Thursday. So if you don't, so if you go here the first time and you want something to tinker with, you can tinker with this, or you can simply clear the page and and start from scratch. What I want to talk about initially is the creation of rich pictures. In this environment, there are a set of primitives that you use to create the elements of a model. There are connectors that you use to connect the pieces together. The typical Windows type of actions and styles that you find in most all programs. And then there are some tools that are specific to the Insight Maker environment, and we'll talk about most of them on Thursday. Once you create a model, you want to go ahead and save it. And as I said, these are primitives that you create with. They're also selectable by right-clicking from the drop-down. So I'm going to create a piece of text and just select it and say, this is new text, and change the size of it to about 14 point and get rid of the underline. Now I'm going to save this and just call it test, and I can provide a set of tags, and you can search in Insight Maker based on tags. This is just a demo for the webinar. Now once I save this, notice that this dims, and now in the future, every time I make a change, I'm going to hold down the control key and drag this, which creates a duplicate. Notice that this highlighted for a moment and then it dimmed again, and that's because it saved the changes. So you don't have to worry about losing things. It's constantly saving things for you. So let me call this inventory. Sometimes this goes well and sometimes it doesn't in terms of what it is that ends up getting developed, because I'm sort of fabricating this on the fly. This is INVE and inventory, INVENTORY, inventory. And I know that inventory orders have a tendency to reduce inventory. So let me go ahead and get a link here, mouse over this and draw that, and then I'm going to select the link, and I'm going to say reduces. So now I have orders reduces inventory. What I have is two pieces of text with a link between them, and the link has a label on it. I can do all of the typical kinds of stuff with this text in terms of colors and backgrounds and fills, and you know, and it depends upon what you want it to look like, but it's cosmetic. Because it's a web environment, the keystrokes for delete, cut, copy, and paste usually work. Sometimes they stop, but the ones here always work. For a link, the default label for link is link. And if the default label is link, it's not displayed. If you want to represent something else, all you have to do is attach a label, and that label will show up. You can also assign notes. This is from a customer. This is in the factory. And if you attach notes to them, when you mouse over them, this little eye shows up, and you can click on it so the notes show. It's extremely beneficial to add additional thoughts to a model beyond what you simply put in the labels. I personally find that when I go back to my own models 6 or 12 months later, I can't remember all the thoughts that I had in mind at the point in time that I was building the model. So that I really try to get myself to also add something behind the actual entity that's on the screen, so that it helps me in the future as to what it was I was thinking about. And it's very beneficial if you want other people to understand the models that you build. I don't know how many times, I've lost track of the number of times that people have sent me a model that they wanted me to comment on. And I've looked at it for 5 minutes and dropped it in the trash can because I simply could not understand from the labels alone what it was that they were trying to imply. So, I mean, if you want to develop models that help you and other people understand, capturing thoughts is a good thing. Production has a tendency to increase inventory. Now, I'm doing this at the moment with pieces of text, and as I said, you can click text and add text this way, or you can right click and add text this way, and I forget what it is on the Mac. It's I don't know, option click or something. Or you can click on something, hold down the control key, and duplicate whatever that item was, or you can duplicate the whole thing if you want a lot of pieces, and you can select and highlight and delete all of the typical kinds of Windows things. You can in fact build rich pictures with any of the elements here, though if you're really building a rich picture, which is labels, relationships, and pictures, using the picture element might be a good thing as opposed to just using text. The picture element was initially included because it was meant for describing reinforcing and balancing structures for simulation models and causal loop diagrams. Though when we reduced the connection rules, we said, well, it would be really nice if we had additional pictures. So Scott added a whole bunch of additional pictures on this drop down so that you can select and change the pictures to other things. But then, you know, I mean, how long does that last? There are a gazillion pictures that one might want to use for a model, and they're unmanageable on a drop-down. So the next point was, all right, where is the best place in the world to find tons of pictures? Well, Google has an endless supply of pictures. So if I just go to Google and type in orders and then I click on images, I get an endless array of images. And though what we found out was that all of these images that are displayed are in fact funky Google redirects to where the image really is. So if I right click on this and tell it to open it in a new tab, I find out where the image really is, and if I right click and copy the URL from there, then when I go here and click this and paste that URL into image, I get the order. And I can do that with any image that I find any place, and then I can go ahead and simply move this from there to here and get rid of this, and I can begin to create a model with a set of elements that are more visually informative than just the labels themselves. And I can go ahead and label those in addition to the picture itself if I want to, though I don't have to. And I can modify or manage where that label appears if I need to. So that all right, and let me find inventory. Oh, that looks like inventory. Let me do inventory, select this, copy URL, go back here, create this one. Put this up here. Sometimes, well, oftentimes, get used to this being a messy business because, I mean, after you work on a model for a while and put things in and take things out and you get it to look just the way you want, it loses the awareness of all of the things you went through to create the model to begin with. So I mean, after doing this for years, it's still a messy business. You add things and add things and add things and it gets really messy and you throw things away and it's a very iterative process. The learning to build good models is like any other skill. It's something that you learn by doing and you practice it, and over time it gets easier. Thinking about creating models is not nearly as developmental as actually spending time building models. So my comment to you and my encouragement is go to Insight Maker and build models. And don't worry about them being right. Just build models, and the more models you build, the better they'll get. And then when you share them with other people and they look at them and they say, what were you smoking when you built this? You then realize that there are certain things that you need to go back and rethink again and continue to refine it and evolve it to a point where it is in fact a more meaningful model. So I personally, my preference for creating models when I don't quite know what to do with it is I'll create them with a picture and I will tell it that there is actually no picture for the picture. I will give it some text. How about text? And then I will tell it to put the text in the middle, remove the fill and remove the outline. So now it looks like text, but it isn't text. And that way, if I create this model with text, and I decide at some point in the future that I actually want to add images to the various labels that are part of the model itself, it's easy to do because it was done with a picture primitive. It just looks like text because of the things that I did to it. Any questions so far? Well, everybody hasn't left yet, so I must be doing relatively okay. So rich, as I said, rich pictures, there are really no rules associated with how you go about developing it. It's simply meant to be a relationship between a number of elements, and you get to determine what the elements are that are appropriate to the situation that you're trying to depict or to convey to other people, and sort of up to you. Thanks, Timothy. I almost forgot that. Timothy wants to know how to bend the links. You see, most applications that do models have curved arrows in them, and part of the reason that Insight Maker is free is because it's cobbled together with a whole bunch of off-the-shelf components, and all of the drawing is done with MXGraph. And MXGraph does not have a capability for doing curved arrows. And that's probably the one thing about Insight Maker that has upset me since I started using it. Though as of late, I have come to realize that there's another kind of arrow that's even better than curved arrows, and that's a segmented arrow. So if I select a link and I hold down the Shift key and click on it, I can in fact add a number of handles which I can move in any way that I want to, so that I can now curve or segment a line in any way that I want to. And this little yellow handle that ends up on the label, if there is a label visible, I can pick up and move and put the label for this wherever it is that I want it. So you can use segmented lines to connect around corners, as opposed to having it have to be a curved line. So if I do this and then select, it's selected, hold down the Shift key, put a few handles on this, I can now do this. And to remove the links, supposedly you're supposed to hold down the Shift key and be able to click on these and they go away, but MXGraph hasn't got that fixed yet. So if you simply click on one of the handles and pull it off and put it back, all of the segments go away, or you can move it to someplace else. So, okay, Timothy, thank you much. So that's essentially what's involved in rich pictures. You can also take a number of elements and select them and place them in a folder. The folder is another element which, if you put things in the folder, it knows that they're in the folder, and when you move the folder, they will move, or you can move them in the folder. You can also close the folder. The folders are nice if you want to be able to do abstractions, so that I have a dozen items in this folder, maybe, and I close it and I resize it and I call it in the factory. So if the model gets too elaborate and convoluted, you can begin to abstract things by collecting them together and putting them into a folder, so someone can open the abstractions piece by piece and look at them, as opposed to having to look at them all at once. And you can do backgrounds for folders and bring them forward and backward, and you should remember, though, that when you put things in a folder, they move with the folder, and if you delete the folder, all of the things in the folder are also deleted. So if you want to get rid of the folder but not lose the things in it, you need to select them, drag them out of the folder, and you know that you have everything out of the folder when you can no longer collapse it. It won't let you collapse the folder because there's nothing in it. And then you can delete it, and it doesn't delete the things that were in the folder. Take care, Christy. Hopefully I'll see you on Thursday. Okay. So this is, the pictures that I have showed you so far have been mostly rich pictures. And most of the other pictures that I will show you are rich pictures. If you go to this page on the Modeling and Simulation with Insight Maker, there are 2 videos associated with doing rich pictures, and they're a bit more detailed than what I covered here. There is there's a set of diagrams or type of diagram called causal loop diagram, which has a more explicit set of rules associated with how you put things together, and the reason is that the diagram, the model itself is supposed to be more informative about the interactions themselves. Not that you couldn't put all of the relevant interactions in a rich picture. I mean, you'll see shortly that there are a lot of pictures, a lot of models that I develop that end up actually being hybrids between rich pictures and causal loop diagrams. But the difference between rich pictures and causal loop diagrams is there is a convention for relationships, and that is that if I have two elements, and let me just create this text and call this A, call this A, get rid of this, and then call this B. There's really only a couple of ways that I can talk about A influencing B. I can say that when A increases, B increases, and when A decreases, B decreases, meaning that the relationship is in the same direction. And if you're familiar with the fifth discipline, Sengi's work, there was a notation in the fifth discipline called S's and O's for same and opposite, so that one might label the relationship with an S to say that the relationship between the two of them is the same, so that as A increases, B increases, and as A decreases, B decreases, though the relationship says absolutely nothing about the changes in B influencing A. It's a one-directional influence. The alternative being the O notation, which is meant to be opposite, to say, to say that as A increases, B decreases, or as A decreases, B increases, which that is an opposite notation. Though there's a difficulty with the S and the O notation, because if you think about, let me put a piece of text back here and call it production. It's I-O-N. And connect this back to there to say that production increases inventory. Well, production does, I mean, if you increase production, you increase inventory. If you reduce production, it still increases inventory, just not so fast. So that the S and the O notation are not correct in this context. So there is in fact an older notation, which is a plus and minus notation, which has some advantages and some disadvantages, of course, in that the plus notation implies that as A increases, B increases, or A adds to B. The minus notation being A, as A increases, it subtracts it. As A increases, B decreases, or A subtracts from B. So that the advantage is that it's a more appropriate notation, but the difficulty is that the definition is overloaded. So here we can say production adds to inventory. If production decreases, it still adds to inventory. It just doesn't add so fast. So I have a real preference for the plus and the minus notation, and I have to make a distinction between things that change instantaneously and those things that represent stocks or quantities of stuff. As I open the faucet for the bathtub more and more, the bathtub fills faster. As I close the faucet, the bathtub is still filling up, just not so fast. So it's best to specifically identify those kinds of things that are stocks, those things that are quantities of things that if time stopped, they would still have a value, but they wouldn't change. Whereas the stuff that's flowing in fact, has to change over time. And that becomes extremely more relevant when we talk about stock and flow models on Thursday, because of the equations behind the scenes that explicitly govern the way things change. So I prefer the plus and minus notation as opposed to the S and the O notation. Though because I'm talking about causal loop diagrams, doesn't it sort of stand to reason that there ought to be a loop someplace? I mean, how can I have causal loop diagrams without loops? So let me get rid of this. Let me change this back to no link, sorry, and just let me get, I gotta get back to just a blank piece of text to work with, and I'll call this principal, like as principal in a savings account. I'll position it in the middle and make it smaller. And let me get rid of this label. So I have principal and I have interest. And I have an interest rate. And I also have interest. R-E-S-T. Things that are generally associated with a savings account, so that periodically the principal and the interest rate interacts to create interest. So the interest rate adds to the interest, and the principal adds to the interest. And that happens monthly or yearly or whatever, depending upon when the interest is computed. Though once the interest is computed, it's added back to the principal. And now I have two links on top of each other, so I need to separate them. And what I now have is a loop, and this interest adds to the principal, so I'll make another one of these. So principal and interest interact to create interest, and the interest adds to the principal. And I have what is referred to typically as a reinforcing loop. So let me put a picture in there. And the typical notation for that is either a clockwise or counterclockwise loop with a plus sign in it to mean that it's a reinforcing structure. This is one of the two basic types of loops that exist and show up in all of the causal loop diagrams, regardless of how intricate, complicated, or complex the model actually is. So this is a reinforcing loop, not the best reinforcing loop I've ever drawn. The alternative is a balancing loop, and rather than duplicate all of those, I'm just going to call this the current state. There is in fact a current state of something, and I have a desired state. The way that I would prefer things to be, and the difference between those two represents a gap, because they're not what I would like them to be. The current situation is not what I would like it to be. Come on, I got the wrong one. So the desired state and the current state interact, And that gap influences me to, in fact, take action. And the action moves the current state in the direction of the desired state. So this adds, this adds, this adds, and this actually subtracts. So that the assuming that the desired state is greater than the current state, the difference between them results in action to move the current state in the direction of the desired state. And as it gets closer and closer, once the current state reaches the desired state, there is no difference, so there's no action. And this is actually what's called a balancing loop. And one can tell the difference between balancing loops and reinforcing loops by walking the loop and counting the number of negative influences in the loop. If there is an odd number of influences, it's a balancing loop. If it's an even number of negative influences, then it's a reinforcing structure. As an example of, so these are the two structures that are involved in all of the causal loop diagrams that people draw, regardless of how complex or complicated that diagram is. And here is an example of Aesop's fable of the boy who cried wolf as a rich picture causal loop diagram hybrid where there's a boy who is bored to death tending sheep and he wants attention, and those two different states interact to cause the boy to cry wolf. And the intent for crying wolf is to cause the townspeople to come running and make the boy the center of attention, which relieves the boredom. Now, at the same time that that is happening, if the boy cries wolf and there is no wolf, it represents a lie, which reduces the belief-o-meter, which tends to add less to townspeople's willingness to come running, which tends to make the boy less the center of attention and not relieve the boredom. And also, if the boy cries wolf and there is a wolf, that represents a truth, and that increases the belief-o-meter, increasing the townspeople's likeliness to come running. So what I have now is a rich picture diagram of Aesop's fable of the boy who cried wolf. If I amend this slightly by putting all of the plus and minuses and the loop indicators on it, it's now actually a causal loop diagram where this is a boredom relief loop. It's a balancing loop because if I walk the sequence, there is one balancing influence in the loop. If I walk this sequence, there's one balancing influence, two balancing influences. So this particular loop, which is a reduced belief loop, is a reinforcing loop. And this loop, from the boy to truth, to increase, to belief, to townspeople, to center, to boredom, back to the boy, there's one balancing influence in it, so it is an improved belief and it's a balancing loop. So there's an example of Aesop's fable and the boy who cried wolf. As a, I'm running way behind today. Not unusual. As an example of an attempt to reduce the development of a causal loop diagram to an orderly mess as opposed to just a complete mess, what I do is, given a situation where, as an example, there are crop-eating insects and they are causing crop damage, so there is a relationship between them. The next thing I ask is, what else is happening? The crop damage typically leads me or encourages me to apply pesticide because I know that pesticides kill the crop-eating insects. Though the situation I'm dealing with is year after year I end up having to spray more to kill more bugs, and it seems to be a never-ending process that's not really getting me to where I want to go. So, and the question is, why is it happening, and is there actually a smarter thing to do? So I continue to ask myself, for these elements that I already have in the model, what other things are there that I can or should think about? And I can look at this and say, well, crop-eating insects have insect births, and the insect births increase the number of crop-eating insects, so I have a reinforcing structure that's a population growth structure. At the same time that that's going on, I have learned that when I apply pesticides, it has a tendency to promote pesticide immunity in the insects, which results in more crop-eating insects. So when I follow this loop from crop-eating insects to damage to pesticides to immunity back to insects, I have an R3 immunity structure. And when I apply pesticides, I find out that it also kills the controlling insects, which used to devour the crop-eating insects. And if I follow this sequence, crop-eating insects to crop damage to apply pesticides, to controlling insects and back to crop-eating insects, I have two balancing influences which cancel each other out, which means this is in fact a reinforcing structure taking me in a direction I completely don't want to go. So by continuing to start with a situation and continuing to unfold the set of relationships, I begin to get a better sense of what's actually happening. Though this is not the end. I mean, there are additional questions that one should in fact ask, so that if I decide to quit applying pesticides and encourage the development of controlling insects so they devour more of the crop-eating insects, so that I'm developing the insects as opposed to applying pesticides so I don't get pesticide immunity, and I managed to succeed in developing all of these controlling insects and they eat all the crop-eating insects. Well, when the crop-eating insects are gone, what are they going to eat next? Because they're likely to still be hungry. And how long can I apply pesticides without actually harming the water supply that I use to feed the farm animals, or injures the crops, or I mean, it's just on and on and on. So that if I don't begin to think beyond the initial response or reaction to the situation, which is I have insects damaging my crops, so I apply pesticides to kill the insects, I actually end up making the situation worse over time and more difficult to deal with. So there is also a two-part video here on that webpage for creating causal loop diagrams that you can watch. There are, let's see, there are also a couple of additional examples that I provided in the sequence that you can take a look at, which since I'm out of time, I'm not going to go through them, but there's one for a home heating system that talks about the interaction between acceptable cost and desired comfort, and one makes me more comfortable and one makes me uncomfortable in terms of what it costs me to do that and how it ends up oscillating back and forth. One in terms of time management and how I go through this whole sequence of things to improve the situation in terms of all of the things that I have to do, giving me no time left to do the things that I want to do, and finding out that when I figure out how to make time available for myself, my response to that is to create more things to do so that I am, in fact, my own worst enemy. Um, and this one is written out. It's a sequence of interactions in a call center in terms of the gyrations that the organization ends up going through trying to improve its call stats and actually ending up making things worse. So I hope you have found this session informative. As I said, donations are greatly appreciated. And if you're not registered for Thursday, please do so. On this page, Thursday, I'll actually talk about real simulation models where you develop the model and there are equations behind each one of the elements, and you simulate the model to get a sense of the implications of the interactions over time. And there it is. Any questions? It scares me when people don't ask any questions. Of course, there are still some of you still here, so I guess it could have been worse. Well, if there are no questions, then I will see you on Thursday. Thank you very much. Have a great day.